The desert was holding its breath. Not a grain of sand moved. Not a crow dared to caw. Even the air felt like it was waiting, watching, as a lone figure rode across the cracked earth, his shadow stretched long behind him like a ghost refusing to let go. Calder Hayes had been in storms, in wars, in the kind of bar fights that left teeth scattered like grains of corn on the floorboards. But nothing felt as silent as this morning, when the sun rose like a blade being drawn from its sheath. His horse, Dustmorn, snorted, uneasy. Calder didn't blame him. The world had changed overnight. Maybe he had too. A folded letter rested in his coat pocket, worn soft from how many times he had pressed his thumb against it. He didn't need to open it again to know every word carved into his memory. He could see his brother's handwriting, messy, tilted, half eager, half desperate. Calder, bring the money and hurry. I found something big, something they'll kill to keep. Don't trust anyone. 3 days later, his brother was dead. The sheriff said outlaws. The undertaker said poison. The bartender said, wrong people, wrong time. But Calder didn't believe any of them. His brother wasn't a gambler, not anymore. Wasn't a trouble chaser like Calder. He was quiet, studious, gentle in a way the frontier didn't make room for. And he'd died with bruises on his throat. Calder pulled his hat lower as he passed a ridge of sandstone that looked like a row of crooked teeth. A dust devil spun briefly in the distance, thin as smoke. The horizon shimmered with heat, and just beyond it lay Jericho Flats, where the prize waited. A prize his brother had died for. A prize Calder never asked for. He only knew one thing, whatever it was, he wasn't leaving without answers. When the gambling tent finally came into view, canvas torn, flags faded by the merciless sun, it seemed too small, too pitiful, to be the place that had decided the fate of a man's life. But inside, people shouted, cursed, bellowed, won, and lost fortunes with hands that never stopped trembling. Calder pushed through the flaps. The heat inside was worse than outside. Lamps smoked. Men hunched over greasy tables, eyes hungry. A woman played a fiddle in the corner with the sadness of someone who'd forgotten what joy sounded like. Behind a makeshift counter, a fat man with fingers like sausages waved at him. "You're Hayes, ain't ya? Brother of that bright-eyed fella who won big." Calder's jaw hardened. "Where is it?" The man grinned, yellow teeth flashing. "Your prize. Out back." Calder didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply walked. The crowd parted for him without being asked. Something about him, maybe the way he didn't look at anything he passed, maybe the dead quiet in his eyes, made even the drunkest men step aside. Behind the tent, a crude pen made of splintered wood cast a long shadow. A chain rattled. A breeze lifted something, dark hair, long and tangled. She sat with her back to him at first, wrists bound, ankles tethered to a post hammered into the ground. Her dress was worn, torn in places where someone had grabbed her too roughly. But her posture, it was straight, proud, as if no chain could force her to bow. When she heard him approach, she didn't flinch, didn't turn, only lifted her head slightly, sensing him like one senses a storm coming, not with fear, but with certainty. The fat man waddled behind Calder, panting. "Gotta say, your brother got real lucky. Folks don't usually win merchandise like her. Traders brought her down from the mountains. Apache, they said. Sold. Are off cheap since they were movin' fast." Calder's stomach twisted. "She's not merchandise." The man snorted. "Everything's merchandise if you got the right buyer." Calder stepped forward, slowly, quietly, as if approaching a frightened animal, though something in him whispered she was far from that. She finally turned to face him. And the world seemed to stop again. Her eyes, dark as obsidian and just as sharp, locked onto his. Not pleading, not afraid, not broken. No, her gaze was defiant, alive with a fire he hadn't seen in years. Maybe ever. She didn't look at him like he was her captor. She looked at him like she already knew how he would die. Calder felt his breath hitch before he could stop it. The fat man chatted on uselessly. "We call her Redbird. Ain't her real name, of course. They never tell us those. Wild ones, you know, but she's trained enough. Won't bite unless you rile her. Now, the paperwork." Calder cut him off with a low voice. "Remove the chains." The man's smile faltered. "Beg pardon. Remove them. That ain't how it works, Hayes. She's wild stock, and you ain't taken ownership yet. You gotta sign." Calder's hand dropped to the revolver at his hip. He didn't draw it, just let the gesture hang in the air like a warning. "I said, he repeated, remove the chains. The fat man swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in water. All right, sure, you're the winner. He fumbled with the keys, muttering under his breath. The metal locks clinked open one by one. Wrist cuffs first, then ankles. When the last chain hit the ground, Redbird didn't move. She only watched Calder with that same unreadable intensity. Then the trader backed away. Calder heard him leave but didn't turn around. He and the woman were alone in the desert quiet. A hawk screeched overhead, circling. Calder knelt slowly, not close, not threatening, just enough to show he wasn't the kind of man who towered over someone weaker and called it power. They hurt you? He asked softly. She didn't answer, not with words. Her gaze flicked downward, just once, toward a welt on her forearm, half hidden under dust and dried sweat. Calder's throat tightened. He reached into his coat, pulled out a canteen, and set it between them. She didn't touch it at first, only stared at him as though weighing every thought behind his eyes. Finally, she reached out. Not for the canteen, but for a small stone lying in the dirt. She turned it over in her fingers, studying it. Then she placed it down between them like an offering or a warning, he couldn't tell which. Calder looked at the stone. A line was scratched across it, almost like a tally mark. He frowned. What does that mean? She didn't reply, but her expression changed, just a flicker. A shadow passing behind her eyes. Pain, maybe, or memory. Then she stood, slowly, gracefully, like she'd been waiting years to feel the sky on her skin again. Calder rose with her. The desert wind picked up, shifting strands of her hair, carrying the scent of smoke and sage. Her face hardened when she looked toward the distant mesas, the direction she had been taken from. She took one step forward, then another, away from him. Calder didn't stop her. He didn't know if he had the right to. But when she reached the edge of the camp, she paused. Turned, looked back at him with something different this time, not defiance, not fury. Something like a question, a challenge, a thread pulled taut between two lives that had crashed together by accident or fate. Calder picked up the canteen and walked toward her, keeping a respectful distance. Dustmorn waited behind him, ears twitching. Redbird glanced at the horse, then at the open horizon again. Her hands clenched. The wind tugged at the torn cloth around her arms. Calder spoke quietly. I'm heading north, to the man who ran this game. The one my brother met before he died. She didn't blink. He traded you, Calder said. And he killed my kin. Maybe you want answers as much as I do. A long silence stretched between them, full of things he couldn't name. Then she turned fully toward him. Her jaw tightened, her eyes hardened, and without a single word, she walked past him toward the horse. Calder didn't smile, but something shifted inside him. A weight loosened, not hope, but the possibility of it. He helped her onto Dustmorn, careful not to touch her unless she allowed it. She didn't recoil, but she didn't look at him either. When Calder mounted behind her, he kept his hands on the reins, not on her shoulders. The desert opened ahead like a vast, dangerous promise. As they rode, the sun dipped lower, bleeding gold across the sky. Shadows stretched long. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind picked up again. Harder this time, carrying the smell of something burning. Calder's eyes narrowed. Smoke. Not from a chimney. Not from a campfire. From a settlement. A small one. Directly in their path. Dustmorn snorted and quickened pace. Redbird's posture stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the horse's mane as if bracing herself for what they were about to find. They crested a ridge, and stopped cold. Below them lay a scattering of wooden huts and tents, what used to be a trader's way station. Now it was nothing but charred beams and collapsed roofs. Fire still smoldered in places, embers glowing like the last breaths of dying spirits. Bodies lay in the dirt. Some face down, some curled, some lined up like someone had tried to make a point. Calder felt his pulse pound in his ears. Redbird slid off the horse before he could stop her. She moved like a shadow, stepping lightly among the wreckage. Her face held no fear, only grief she refused to show. Calder followed. He knelt beside a fallen man, his clothes half burned. Rifle still clutched in his hands. Calder touched the wounds, deep, clean cuts. Knives, he murmured. More than one attacker. Redbird turned over another body. This one smaller, younger. Her breath hitched, just barely, but Calder caught it. A whisper of heartbreak. Scavenger birds circled above. The wind howled. On the ground, near the young man, something glinted in the dirt. Calder reached for it, a coin, not ordinary, marked with a symbol cut so sharply it looked like a wound on the metal. The same mark from his brother's letter. A chill crawled up Calder's spine. Someone had been here, someone who'd wanted the world to know it. Redbird stepped closer, her eyes locked on the mark. She knew it too. Calder could see it, in the way her breath deepened, her shoulders squared, her jaw tensed. Their enemies weren't strangers to her. And they weren't far. Footprints littered the dirt, fresh, deep, moving north into the canyon. Calder closed his hand around the coin.
Redbird looked toward the canyon, then at him. Then she gave a single nod, a silent vow, a shared direction. Calder tightened his grip on the reins. The wind shifted. The storm wasn't coming. It had already begun.
The canyon swallowed sound. Even the wind hesitated before slipping between its stone jaws, whispering instead of howling, as if afraid to wake something ancient buried in the red rock. Calder guided Dustmorn along the narrowing trail, the reins loose in his hands. Redbird walked ahead on foot, silent, sure-footed, barely disturbing the dust beneath her steps. The world had shifted since the burned way station. Calder felt it in every breath. The tension in the air wasn't danger alone, it was purpose. Redbird wasn't following him now. They were following the same ghosts. The deeper they moved, the darker the canyon grew. Shadows stretched across the walls like long, grasping fingers. Water dripped from cracks where the stone bowed inward. The air cooled sharply, and a faint trace of sage and smoke clung to the breeze. Redbird paused at a bend and touched the canyon wall. Her fingertips traced a faint mark, 3 short cuts, 1 long diagonal slash across them. Calder recognized it instantly. The stone she had placed between them the first time they met held the same pattern. He stepped closer but didn't crowd her. "Your people." A breath left her, soft but weighted. She nodded once. Calder studied the carving. Trail sign. Another nod. So they're ahead. This time she looked at him. Straight. Open. A flicker, just a flicker, of trust forming behind her eyes. Then she walked on. The canyon walls closed tighter until the light dimmed to a muted copper glow. Dustmorn's hooves echoed against the stone, sounding too loud in a place that felt like it should never hear the voice of a horse or a man. Calder's hand hovered near his revolver. Redbird stopped again, kneeling beside a patch of disturbed earth. She brushed away grit to uncover ash, fresh ash, dark and still warm. A campfire, no more than a day old. She lifted a charred piece of wood and sniffed it. Her jaw tightened. Calder understood without words. The ones they hunted were close. Maybe hours ahead, maybe watching right now. A soft rumble of thunder rolled overhead, muffled by the canyon's walls. Calder looked up. The sky, what narrow sliver he could see, had grown darker. Bruised with clouds, a storm was building. He felt the pressure behind his ears, the way the air thickened. Redbird noticed it too. She glanced at the sky, then at the steep walls pressing in around them. Flash floods were no joke in canyon country. One wrong hour, and they'd be swept away like leaves. Calder swallowed. "We need higher ground." She didn't speak, just pointed left, to a barely visible trail snaking upward like a scar. He nodded, and they climbed. By the time they reached the ridge, the sky had gone iron gray. Wind ripped at Redbird's hair, carrying with it the smell of rain and distant electricity. The land stretched wide and wild here, rolling hills tangled with brush, broken only by stunted trees clinging stubbornly to the soil. In the distance, smoke curled upward. Not from a fire, from torches. Calder dropped to a crouch, peering through the brush. A group of riders moved along the valley floor, 8, maybe 9 of them, dark figures against the copper earth. Too organized to be drifters. Too armed to be simple traders. Their horses were lean and restless. Their rifles slung low. One rider carried a long staff with a strip of cloth tied near the top, a signal flag. Redbird's breath shuddered. Barely audible, but Calder felt it, like a pulse through the ground. She recognized them. Her hand slowly rose to touch a beaded strand hidden beneath her torn dress. It wasn't jewelry. It was something else, a part of her identity. Her story. Calder's gut twisted. What did they do? He asked quietly. Her eyes stayed fixed on the riders. Lightning flickered in the distance, throwing harsh white light across the landscape. In that brief flash, he saw pain tighten her features, raw, haunting. She lifted her hand again and pointed 2 fingers at the riders, then curled them, dragging them across her chest like claws. Calder understood. They had taken something from her. Someone from her family, perhaps, tribe, life she should have had. He finally understood why she had looked at the stone in the dirt the way she had. Why she watched the horizon like she was trying to see memories instead of mountains. The mark they followed wasn't merely a trail. It was a tally of loss. The wind rose suddenly, whipping dust into their faces. Thunder cracked. Rain began to splatter the ground, slow at first, then faster. Redbird grabbed Calder's sleeve, not roughly, not desperately, but urgently, and pulled him toward an outcrop of rocks. He followed without hesitation. They pressed into the shelter as rain hammered the earth. Dustmorn huddled beside them, trembling slightly. Calder soothed the horse with a touch. The storm hit fast. Rain carved streams through the dirt. Wind screamed through the hills, ripping leaves from branches. Lightning burst across the sky in violent forks. Redbird wrapped her arms around herself, not in fear but in something close to grief. As if storms reminded her of moments she didn't dare revisit. Calder knelt beside her, careful not to touch unless she allowed it. "You know them," he finally said, voice soft against the roar of rain. She lifted her chin, eyes wet, not with rain, not entirely. And then, for the first time, she spoke. One word, Raven. Her voice was low, rough, unused, but beautiful in the way a forgotten song is beautiful when heard again. Calder blinked. Leader. She nodded once. Lightning lit the sky again, revealing the riders disappearing into the distance. Calder exhaled. He the one who took you. Her throat bobbed. She pressed a hand flat to her chest, fingers trembling. She shut her eyes briefly, and in the flicker of another lightning flash, Calder saw what was left unsaid. Raven hadn't just taken her. He had burned her world to the ground. The storm raged for nearly an hour before quieting to a steady rain. When it finally softened, Redbird stepped out first, face lifted toward the dark horizon where Raven's riders had disappeared. Not with fear, with resolve, Calder saddled Dustmorn. "We follow at dawn." Storms washed out the tracks. Redbird turned to him slowly. He expected anger, or rejection, or silence. Instead, she walked toward Dustmorn and placed a hand on the horse's neck. Then she motioned for Calder to kneel. He hesitated but obeyed. She removed the beaded strand from around her neck, a simple piece of leather with a single turquoise bead threaded through the middle. She held it out to him, her hand steady. He shook his head. "I can't take that," she insisted, pressing it gently into his palm. Calder stared at it, felt its weight, much heavier than it looked. He looked up at her, rain dripping from her hair, from her lashes. "What does it mean?" he asked. She placed a hand on her own chest again, where the necklace had been. Then she touched his. Calder's breath stilled, a gesture without a voice, but loud enough to echo through his bones. Not ownership, not debt, not submission, recognition, acknowledgement, a silent understanding that their paths were tied now, maybe by vengeance, maybe by fate, maybe by something growing between pain and survival. Calder tied the bead around his wrist. Redbird watched him quietly, then nodded. They walked through the thinning rain toward a cluster of trees, searching for shelter. The night deepened. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries long and lonely. The air was cold enough to see their breaths. They found a hollow beneath a fallen tree and set camp. Calder built a fire, small, contained. Redbird gathered dry sagebrush, shaking water from her hair. She moved with a calm efficiency, each action purposeful, controlled. Calder watched her from the corner of his eye, trying to understand this woman fate had thrown into his life like a spark into dry brush. She sat beside the fire but kept a careful distance. Her eyes reflected the flames. They flickered with memories she didn't speak of. Calder passed her a piece of dried meat from his saddlebag. She didn't accept it right away. She sniffed it, tested it, then finally took a small bite. They ate in silence. The storm clouds thinned, revealing a sliver of moon. Its pale light bathed the earth in silver, turning raindrops into tiny stars scattered across the ground. After a long while, Calder spoke. "You said his name, Raven." Her gaze didn't shift from the fire. But she listened. "What did he take from you?" he asked. Her jaw clenched. The flames danced in the reflection of her eyes. Then she reached into the dirt and drew the mark again, 3 short lines and 1 slash. Calder frowned. "A tally. Of what?" She erased the symbol with the flat of her palm. Then drew more. One line. Then another. Then another. 3 short ones. A single pause. Then, slowly, she dragged her finger across them. A 4th mark. Calder's breath left him. Family. She shut her eyes, shoulders tightening. The slash wasn't a tally of kills, but of loss. 4 souls taken. By Raven. Calder felt something cold settle inside him. A quiet anger. A low, steady burn that reminded him why he was here. Why his brother was dead. Raven wasn't some faceless danger now. He had taken from them both. Redbird lifted her head, looked straight at him. In her eyes he saw not just pain, but a vow he shared. The fire popped. Embers floated into the night, rising like fragile spirits before fading. Calder lay back against the hollowed log, staring at the sky. Redbird rested on the opposite side of the fire, eyes open, watching the shadows. Neither slept much, but by dawn, both were ready. The sun rose blood red, casting long streaks of fire across the horizon. The storm had carved deep channels in the earth, but Redbird found the trail, not by sight, but by signs Calder never would have noticed. A bent blade of grass. A displaced stone. A tuft of horse hair caught in a thorn bush. They traveled in silence, breath slow, steps purposeful. By midday, they reached the mouth of a ravine where the earth split open like an old wound. And there, carved into the rock, was Raven's mark. Fresher than any they had seen. Calder touched the turquoise bead at his wrist.
Redbird's hand drifted toward the knife at her hip. The air thickened. Their pasts were no longer behind them. They were standing on its doorstep.
The ravine breathed cold air, as though the earth itself exhaled memories through its cracked, jagged ribs. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a single rider. Shadows clung to the stone walls like old secrets, and the smell of smoke drifted faintly from somewhere deep inside. Not campfire smoke, torch smoke. Calder dismounted, steadying Dustmorn with a gentle touch. Redbird had already slipped ahead, knife in hand, body low, eyes narrowed with a focus he had only seen in hunters tracking the last heartbeat of a wounded animal. Calder followed, revolver drawn but held close to his chest to keep its metal from catching the light. The ravine widened gradually until it opened into a hollow carved by centuries of storms. A cluster of makeshift structures, canvas tents, rough-hewn wooden shacks, a corral, lay sprawled across the basin. The men they had followed were there, scattered like restless wolves, sharpening blades, tending to horses, muttering in harsh tones that the wind carried only fragments of. But Calder saw what Redbird saw first. At the center of camp, atop a stone platform, stood a man with hair as black as a raven's wing, braided down his back. Broad shoulders, a commanding stillness, eyes cold enough to freeze fire. Raven. He was speaking to a small group of riders. Calder couldn't hear the words, but the rhythm of his hands, the intensity of the gazes, made it clear. Orders were being given. Preparations for something imminent. Redbird's breath caught silently beside him. Calder didn't need to turn to feel the storm inside her. It radiated off her like heat from a forge. Calder whispered, "We need a plan." She didn't respond. Her hand tightened around her knife, the leather-wrapped handle creaking. Calder reached out, not to stop her, but to anchor her. His fingers brushed her arm lightly, enough for her to feel the human weight behind the gesture. She froze, not pulling away, but not turning either. He whispered again, "If you rush him now, you won't reach him. They'll cut you down." Her shoulders trembled, rage, grief, or both. Then slowly, painfully, she loosened her grip on the blade. A sound cracked across the basin. A whip. No, Calder realized with a stab of horror, it was not a whip. A cry followed it, a young voice. They both turned their eyes toward a small enclosure at the far side of the camp. Inside it, 2 prisoners, one elderly man, one barely a boy, were tied to posts. The boy had blood on his cheek. The older man had his head bowed, unmoving. Raven walked toward them. Calder felt Redbird's breath stop. The old prisoner lifted his head with great effort, revealing paint streaked down his face, symbols Calder recognized from the carvings on the canyon walls. Her people. The man breathed a single word, barely audible. Yonna. Calder glanced at Redbird, and his heart tightened. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on a boulder, eyes burning with a grief so sharp it seemed to cut the air. Calder didn't need her to explain. That name had weight. Blood, wait. Family. Maybe the last she had left. Raven raised a hand. One of his men stepped forward with a knife. Not punishment. Execution. Redbird moved before Calder's mind caught up. Like lightning given flesh, she sprinted from the shadows, feet silent, knife ready. The world narrowed to the narrow path between her and the men poised above her family. Calder swore under his breath and charged after her. Shouts erupted across the camp. Raven turned slowly, as if he had known she was coming all along. Redbird lunged toward the executioner, not Raven, striking his wrist with brutal precision. The knife flew into the dirt. Her elbow cracked across his jaw. He fell. The camp exploded into motion. Men leapt up from their fires. Horses reared. Torches flared as boots thundered in every direction. Raven stood still, unmoving, watching. Calder fired a warning shot into the air, forcing 3 riders to scatter. Bullets whined past him. He ducked behind an overturned wagon, then rolled out and took down another man aiming for Redbird. She reached the old man, Yonah, and cut his bindings. Her hands trembled, but not with fear. With urgency, desperation. She lifted his face. His eyes softened when he saw her. His hand brushed her cheek. A blessing, a farewell. He tried to stand, legs buckling. Redbird braced him with her shoulder, but she was slight compared to his weight. The boy was next. Calder reached him first, slicing through the rope and dragging him to cover. More gunfire, more shouting. Raven finally began to move. Each step was deliberate, patient, a predator walking through confusion it had anticipated. Calder fired at him. Raven didn't flinch. The bullet struck the wooden post behind him. Keep your aim steady, Hayes, Raven called out, voice deep and calm. Your brother struggled with the same thing. Calder's blood turned to ice. He fired again, rage clouding his vision. Raven stepped aside, effortless. You want answers, Raven said. Come earn them. Redbird looked up sharply, eyes blazing. She shifted Yonah's arm onto the boy, motioning him to help carry the elder. Then she rose, knife glinting in her hand, fury etched into every line of her body. Calder grabbed her wrist. Not like this. She yanked free, not in rejection, but necessity. Raven opened his arms slightly, inviting her. Come then, little hawk. The world exploded again. Redbird charged. Raven drew a blade, not the long knife most warriors carried, but a short obsidian dagger, black as night, sharp enough to split stone. Their clash was brutal, silent. Redbird moved like a dancer, swift and deliberate, each strike aimed for the heart. Raven countered with economy, turn, parry, pivot, slash. Sparks of pain and rage collided between them, reflected in their eyes. Calder fought to reach them, but the camp broke into chaos again. 3 men cornered him. He ducked one blow, kicked another into the fire pit, cracked the butt of his revolver into the 3rd skull. But every time he tried to push toward Redbird, someone blocked his path. Raven wanted it this way. A duel she had to fight alone. Redbird swept low, slashing Raven's thigh. Blood spilled. He snarled. He caught her wrist, twisting hard. She cried out but didn't drop her blade. Calder roared, breaking through the last of Raven's men, but 2 more tackled him before he could reach her. He hit the ground hard, vision swimming. Dust filled his lungs. A boot collided with his ribs. He forced himself up, fought with the kind of desperation that comes from seeing someone else's fight become your own. When he finally broke free, blood dripping from his lip, he saw Raven drive Redbird backward toward a rock wall. Cornered, her chest heaved, sweat and dust streaked her face. The bead of turquoise Calder wore at his wrist burned against his skin as if it knew her life hung on a thread. Raven lifted his blade for the final blow. Calder fired. The bullet hit Raven's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Redbird surged forward with a cry torn straight from the heart of her suffering. Her knife drove into Raven's chest. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. He fell to his knees. Then to the earth. Silence crashed across the camp. Redbird stood trembling, blood on her hands, breath breaking. Calder reached her just as her strength gave out. He caught her, pulling her close, not to restrain her, not to claim her, but to keep her from falling alone. She didn't collapse entirely, she refused to, but she leaned into him enough for him to feel her heartbeat hammering like a wounded drum. Raven lay still. The storm inside the ravine finally broke. Men fled. Some dropped their weapons and ran into the wilderness. Others surrendered to the dirt, hands raised, eyes wide with fear now that the shadow ruling them was dead. Redbird pulled from Calder's arms, legs still shaky, and walked to Yona. The boy supported him, whispering in their language. The elder smiled weakly when she knelt beside him. He touched her cheek once more. Redbird bowed her head against his forehead, a soft exhale escaping her lips. A release of years of pain, guilt, abandonment, loss. When Yona's hand fell limp to the ground, she didn't cry. She simply closed his eyes with a touch gentle enough to break a mountain's heart. Calder looked away, giving her silence instead of words. They buried Yona on the ridge overlooking the ravine, Redbird using a stone to carve the mark into the rock one last time, not a tally of loss now, but a remembrance. A name in the earth. The boy, Koa, stood beside her, clutching her hand. Calder watched from a distance, feeling the weight shift in the air. Redbird was no longer alone in the world. As dusk bled across the sky, Calder saddled Dustmorn, ready to ride east to bring word of the fallen camp. Redbird approached him, eyes soft but steady. She touched the turquoise bead on his wrist. Then she placed her hand over his heart. No words, just a knowing, a gratitude deeper than language. A bond forged in fire and loss. Calder lowered his head, breath shaking. If you want, I can help you reach your people. She shook her head gently. Then she looked at Koa, young, frightened, but holding himself with a bravery he didn't yet understand. Her path was no longer vengeance. It was rebuilding. Calder swallowed the heaviness in his throat. Then I'll ride with you until the border of your lands. She touched his arm again, lighter this time, like a farewell carried by wind instead of sorrow. Morning came too quickly. Redbird stood at the edge of the camp, Koa beside her, the rising sun painting her silhouette in gold and amber. She looked back only once, as Calder mounted Dustmorn. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed, a silent promise that even broken lives could find new roads. Then she and Koa walked north. Calder watched until the trees swallowed them. Dustmorn nudged his shoulder gently. Calder breathed deeply, turning toward the open horizon, toward whatever came next. He was no longer chasing ghosts. He was carrying memories, and somehow, it felt lighter.